welcome teachers and tutors. So today we're going to look at Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. When we consider Julius Caesar, we have to look at the themes. So I'll be going through the themes with you today. And one of the first themes that come to mind is that of fate versus free will. When you think of fate versus free will, Julius Caesar's lack of belief in the superstitions and omens comes to mind, and his belief in his free will. He says, Caesar shall forth. He shall ignore Calpurnius' warnings and the soothsayers' warnings and Artemidorus' warnings and still go ahead despite it being the Ides of March, which is why he eventually meets his own death. Alright? The conspirators have planned to kill him on that day. So it's very ironic that he does not pay heed to any of these superstitions. Alright? So that would be the theme of fate versus free will. And Cassius' belief in free will. Cassius says, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, it is in ourselves, in Act 1, Scene 2. So basically he's saying, if we wanted to do something about the tyranny of Caesar, we can actually revolt against it by conspiring against him. But we're not doing anything because we are underlings, we are petty men. He says that to Brutus, to get Brutus to join the conspiracy and to overcome the tyranny of Caesar. Cassius urges a more self-possessed attitude towards self-determinism, blaming his and Brutus's submissive stance not on a predestined fate but on their lack of free will. And Caesar's ghost visits Brutus and Cassius in their army tents and vows to avenge itself. So once again, fate is comes to the fore. Fate is in the play. And Brutus interprets his and Cassius' defeat as the work of Caesar's ghost and also as the force, as the people's devotion to Caesar. So the fact that eventually Octavius and Mark Antony win the battle reinforces Cassius and Brutus's belief that Julius Caesar's ghost has avenged itself. It is fate at work, and the strong legacy of a man who refused any fear of fate and in his disregard of fate seems to have transcended it. So that would be the theme of fate versus free will for you, Julius Caesar. Now let's look at the next theme of public versus private self. When we say public versus private self, there are the two characters that you really have to consider: Mark Antony and Brutus. How does Brutus act in his private self with Portia? How does he act differently in his public self? He's obsessed with being known as honorable, with being known as very different, very noble, somebody who's very patriotic for his Rome. But on the other hand, Mark Antony is also very different. In his private self, he weeps for his fallen friend. In front of the people, he's known as a shrewd politician. So we have to notice this discrepancy or this disjunction between the private versus the public self. And Mark Antony's private mourning for the dead Caesar, but he's skillfully manipulating the mob speech to incite the anger and resentment of the masses against the conspirators. And Brutus also neglects the private feelings of Portia and disrespects his loyalty to her in favor of what he believes to be the public good. And they are both transforming themselves into ruthless political machines because the conditions and circumstances necessitate them to do so. And Brutus rebuffs his wife Portia, believing himself to be acting on the people's will. Brutus puts aside his personal loyalties and shuns thoughts of Caesar, the man, his friend. Instead, he acts on what he believes to be the public's wishes and kills Julius Caesar. And Cassius goes to the extreme in cultivating his public persona. Caesar fears Cassius' lack of a private life in saying that I do not want such mean-looking men around me. So he is basically saying, I fear Cassius for he's very ambitious. He looks too ambitious. He has plans for himself. Give me men who are fat and give me men who are pleased with themselves, who do not care much for their futures. And ultimately, neglecting private sentiments to follow public concerns brings Caesar to his eventual death. Although Caesar briefly agrees to stay home to humor Calpurnius' superstitions, he succumbs to ambition when Decius tells him that the Senate planned to crown him king that day. So he eventually gives it up and he says Caesar shall forth. And Caesar's public self takes precedence. And just preceding his death, Caesar refuses Artemidorus' plea. And he says, what touches us ourselves shall lastly be served, saying that he gives last priority to his most private concerns. And he thus endangers himself by believing that the strength of the public self would protect him from danger. But actually, it is only by caring for his private self would he be able to escape from a fate of doom or conspiracy. That is the theme of public versus private self in Julius Caesar. Now let's consider the next theme of misinterpretations and misreading. Obviously, the characters fail to interpret certain omens correctly, such as Julius Caesar himself. And as Cicero says, men may construe things after their fashion, clean from the purpose of the things themselves. So it's basically saying a lot of misinterpretation is going to take place in this play. And these misinterpretations of the bad omens before Caesar's death, if only Caesar had interpreted them correctly and not have believed Decius's wrong interpretation of Calpurnius' sightings. And Cassius manipulates Brutus into joining the conspiracy through forged letters, knowing that Brutus's trusting nature will cause him to accept the letters as authentic or genuine pleas from the Roman people. So once again, there is misreading on the part of Brutus. And circumstances of Cassius's death is another misinterpretation, where he thinks that his own enemy has been captured by the enemy troops, but they have not been captured by the enemy troops. It's his own men meeting his own men. So he actually lets go and gives up in war because he misinterprets that the enemy troops have captured his men, which is once again a very pitiable ending. And then Pindarus' erroneous conclusion that Titinus has been captured by the enemy. This is another failing on another misinterpretation. And this misinformation prompts Cassius to seek death. So one leads to another. It's a snowball effect, and it is it's very sad that such misinterpretation, a series of misinterpretations, leads to the eventual outcome, which is a tragedy. And interpreting events correctly is key to the survival in war and politics, as these characters learn. And Mark Antony correctly interprets the crowd's emotions during his funeral speech of Caesar. He allows him to manipulate the masses over to his side. That is it for misinterpretations and misreading in Julius Caesar. Now let's consider the next theme of inflexibility versus compromise. When we look at inflexibility versus compromise, Brutus and Caesar are stubborn and inflexible, ultimately suffering for it. In the play's aggressive political landscape, individuals succeed through adaptability, bargaining, and compromise. Brutus's rigid but honorable ideals leave him open for manipulation by Cassius. Equally resolute, Caesar prides himself on his steadfastness, constancy, yet this constancy helps bring about his eventual assassination, as he refuses to heed ill omens and goes willingly to the Senate into the hands of his murderers. Antony proves the most adaptable of all the politicians. While his funeral speech of Caesar centers on Caesar's generosity towards the citizens, he later searches for ways to turn these funds into cash in order to raise an army against Brutus and Cassius. Although he gains power by offering to honor Caesar's will and provide the citizens their rightful money, it becomes clear that ethical concerns will not prevent him from using the funds in a more expedient manner. Antony may be a successful politician, but his morality is always debatable. Let's look at the next theme of rhetoric and power. When we consider rhetoric and power, we have to look at the funeral speech. The funeral speech of Brutus versus the funeral speech of Mark Antony. Which is more powerful? Obviously, Mark Antony's speech is more powerful because he's able to convince the Roman people, the commoners, that the conspirators have a very selfish and greedy and ambitious motive for killing Julius Caesar. He's able to tell them, make them see the irony of his words. These are honorable men who have killed Julius Caesar. These are honorable men, while actually alternating ironic references to Caesar's own good attempts to win over the Roman people. So, the ability to make things happen by words alone is the most powerful type of authority. When Caesar says, do this, it is performed, says Antony, who attaches a similar weight to Octavius's words toward the end of the play. Even in the Feast of the Lupercal, it is Antony who says, when Caesar says, do this, it is performed. Words also serve to move hearts and minds when the crowd, the mob mentality takes over and they actually rush to kill Helvius Cinna, who is a sinner who is not related to the conspirator sinner, after the Mark Antony speech at the funeral of Julius Caesar. Antony cleverly convinces the conspirators of his desire to side with them, but uses the power of rhetoric to whip the mob into such a frenzy that they charged against Caesar's assassins. That is it for the theme of rhetoric and power. Now, lastly, let's consider the theme of friendship, trust and loyalty. This is definitely an undeniable theme in Julius Caesar. Antony is totally devoted to Caesar and avenges his death and remains true to Caesar till the very end. Pure, unbroken friendship between the two men, trust and loyalty. Caesar is a father figure to Antony, but Brutus and Caesar is a completely different story. Brutus puts the public good above his private loyalty to Caesar. Caesar says, et tu Brute, it means you too Brutus. He is incredulous, he is shaken. It's incredible for him to believe that his own Brutus would turn against him and stab him in the back. So he says, this is the most unkindest cut of all. Obviously, the phrase is grammatically incorrect because it says the most unkindest cut of all. But the superlative most is used for extra emphasis because it shows us that Caesar was unable to digest the fact that Brutus would turn against him. Brutus being his best friend, best confidant. And Brutus and Cassius, this is another pair. Because of Cassius's friendship with Brutus, he is able to manipulate him into joining the conspiracy by throwing forged letters into Brutus's house. Strong friendship, but Cassius is using Brutus to divest power from Caesar and take it for himself. Brutus scolds Cassius for his fundraising tactics to raise money for his army, but in the end they reconcile and their friendship remains till the end of the play. That is it for the themes of Julius Caesar. Stay tuned for the character analysis.